All right. So I'll just give a short introduction for you. We're here today with Dr. Terry Mizrahi, who, beyond being Professor Emeritus at the Silberman School of Social Work at Hunter College, has been in this field for a long time and is actually the former president of the National Association for Social Workers in the early 2000s. She's also the co-chair of the Special Commission to Advance Macro Practice in Social Work and the founder and co-chair of the National Social Work Voter Mobilization Campaign, as well as the founder and board member of the Child Welfare Organizing Project in New York City. That was a very brief introduction, and she will be speaking with us today about political social work and ways in which we can make change through policy. But Dr. Mizrahi, if there's anything else you would like to add, feel free, of course, and I look forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much. Will you bring up my slide show? I'm going to do a brief one. Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, and the students, many from Howard University and other places across the country. So I will talk about how to, what I mean by influencing and a friendly administration. And we will have, at the end, we can have time for questions and answers, any Q&A, anything that's on your mind. This will be about a 20-minute or so presentation. So I think you can begin with slide 2, Ava. I'm looking at the slide directly, so just say.
Yes. Is it showing context and background? Is that showing for you?
Yeah, slide 2. Slide 2, sorry. I think we're good. I'll just move along. So I'm going to talk about what context of crime, of a lot of division, misinformation, but we are part of a administration, very much aligned with us, with social workers and our allies. So I want to talk about the difference when you are inside and outside. You have just the last 40 years. Trump administration were we will say that now this is not the first long time as the solution and not part of the problem. Some of you and younger faculty may recall well the era of the Reagan-Bush years in the 90s and early to 91. You may not remember, and you certainly, some of you weren't even born, when President Reagan called us bleeding heart liberals, social workers. Some of us countered by making a t-shirt say, "I'm proud to be a bleeding heart liberal." When President Clinton then invited his inaugural event, which we also were in the Biden-Harris inauguration, we indeed came in from the cold. So, and we were certainly part of President Obama's thoughts and feelings before before Trump. So I'm on slide 2 that has both and versus either or. And I want to talk about being at the table and at the door, which means being on the inside and being on the outside. It's a time for criticism and a time for compliments. Both and means be behind the scenes with the criticism, but in public with the compliments. At least we begin that way. And a both and approach rather than either or is not wishy-washy. It's an intentional strategy to be sure we're most effective as a profession in promoting social work values, our agenda, and specific policy recommendations. So this is a time for cooperation and collaboration on one end, and occasionally is a time for some confrontation. But we have to be thoughtful and strategic about what we want to accomplish. So I'll give you a couple of examples. We were invited 2 years ago to present when President Biden first came in to talk about police and criminal justice reform. You remember all the turmoil after George Floyd and so on during the 2020 campaign when President Biden asked us to work with many of the Democratic allies in Congress. Former Congresswoman Karen Bass, who's now my mayor because I'm living in Los Angeles, how exciting. Congresswoman Barbara Lee from California, who will now be running for Senate. Sylvia Garcia from Texas. We also had former Congresswoman Val Dennings before she ran. She was an early social worker, and then she ran for governor of Florida. No, she ran for senator, but she did lose, unfortunately. But she had a hell of a campaign. We have Senator Debbie Stefanow from Michigan, who sadly will be stepping down in 2024. A wonderful social worker. And then there's Kristen Sinema from Arizona, a social worker whose ideas and platform are not always aligned with NASW's. Nevertheless, she's a social worker and teaches at Arizona State University some of the macro courses. So when dealing with policing, there were some of those who said social workers shouldn't work with the police and stay out. And we said there's thousands of social workers who do collaboration with police and thousands of others who are critical of how policing is done. So we need people on the inside making change, and we need people on the outside pushing for more. So slide 3, Ava, would be a both end strategy, being at the table and being at the door. So I want to say here that there's no permanent adversaries and allies. It's going to be for you going on the Hill, for you working in your state with your state NASW chapter on lobby days, on your advocacy days. You're going to have certain issues where you're going to find out certain people are going to be on your side occasionally, maybe hardly ever, but they're not permanent because we believe in persuasion. So one of the principles is don't alienate people unnecessarily or prematurely. As I said, there's a time for going forward. There's a time for being bold and critical, but not at the beginning. Let's give people a chance to grow and change and reach enough consensus so we and they can act. And the last thing I want to say about this is to give people an ability to save face. We don't want to alienate and say that they're off our charts, they're off our list. So when we talk about decision making, I want to talk about the word consensus. Many of you here certainly work with groups inside and outside your field placement, or in your agency right now, or in your university. Consensus does not mean unanimity. There has to be enough agreement in your group, whoever is making the ask, to move ahead. But you can't have it's almost impossible to have a unanimous decision. So you want to have consensus, and that means, do we have enough? Can we move ahead? What happens if you don't agree? Would you go along with us? We have to learn people's arguments. We have to be prepared to address them. There are some people who will just say no and leave, but if you have enough, you want to move ahead. The worst thing is to stay stuck, and the worst thing is to move ahead too quickly where you lose too many people. So again, it's both and. And now I want to move to what I would say slide 4, because I don't see the slides at the moment. And slide 4 would have another guiding principle of assume goodwill and common cause. We want to assume that the people you're trying to influence, the mayor, the city council, the school board member, the governor, and the president, we want to assume they want to do the right thing. At least you begin with that assumption that they're uninformed or they're misinformed. So, what's our next step when we say we don't alienate prematurely? We want to educate. That's our first step. We want to give people second chances. We want to come back and is there anything we could provide that would persuade you to change your mind? It's always better late than never. And when you're in this political arena, as you are today, and as this whole advocacy day by Chris, sponsored by Chris, has done, if you're in that arena, negotiation and compromise are not dirty words. It doesn't mean we're naive. And it doesn't mean we give up our principles, but you're rarely ever going to get exactly what you want. We want to give those second chances, and being magnanimous with whatever we get. And even if they say no, we always can go back if we haven't totally alienated them. So being magnanimous is not being weak. Now we're on slide 5. Are the ways to increase your influence. It's going to be some little practical reminders for people who are doing this. And for new folks, it may be some things you haven't thought about. As I alluded to a minute ago, we want to begin with the principle of least contest. I mean, we don't want to alienate. We want to find out what their past positions have been on that issue. Have they ever taken a position? What have been their public pronouncements? What are professional and personal connections that you or anybody in your group or your organization can appeal to them? And the last thing I want to say is to offer yourself and your colleagues and your profession as experts. Don't assume that these political elected officials know everything about the issue or anything about the issue they're expected to vote on. So we want to find out when they have misinformation, where did they get the information? You can say, I have a different view on that. Counter it with facts if you have data. And then stories. What's so important is to tell personal stories about how somebody has been affected positively by Social Security, for example, or negatively by being cut off food stamps, or we're worried that food stamps, SNAP will be cut now in real time. I have a son who has a disability. He collects disability and therefore he's not allowed to work full time. He's now eligible for SNAP. I can't tell you what the difference of a couple of $100 a month means to somebody who wants to be, who is an adult, wants to be on his own and can shop for food without asking somebody in his family to help out. So those are the kinds of things, stories. And then you can say there are many, many people like my son, Josh, like the person that you're going to raise up as an example or exemplar of the policy. It's always good to personalize it, to have a story, but to say that it affects many, many people and not just that one person. So I want to say, starting with the least contest, is a private behind the scenes approach. You'll probably be in touch with the staff person or the staff people of these political leaders if you're working, trying to reach a state official or a city or county official, or even your congressperson. You're rarely going to be able to meet with them. I know how disappointed newcomers are when they've gone on the Hill or they've gone to their state capitol or they've gone to the city hall and not been able to meet with that person. And I want to tell you that meeting with a staff person may even be better, because that staff person's job is to be informed and is to communicate what you have told that person, him or her, to the elected official. It's their job to do that. So don't be disappointed if you get a staff person, but do get a staff person and tell them what you're calling about, what you're meeting about, what your social media says. And then they may not budge. So then we escalate them. We move on to things like sanctions. We move on to things like incentives, what would get them to change their mind. We escalate if we have people and media. We want to bring them into the story when this person is not seeing the light the way we want to, doesn't seem to budge, and is not even listening to our arguments. Then we have to go a little more public and call them out and say, why isn't Senator so-and-so commenting? He has thousands of people in his district who need this or who will be hurt or harmed by it or helped by it. Again, whatever the issue is. So let's begin by doing our homework, getting to know the policy workers. As I said, learn about their past positions, and don't assume because they voted in favor before that they're automatically somebody who will be on your side. Find them out. Find out what appeals to them. Be in touch. Be persistent. What's in their strategic self-interest? So now I ask you, who want to influence policy makers, to reframe the issue. What's the problem? Is it the cost of the proposal? Show them how the cost will save money and time. Is it their values? Well, they still may have somebody who is mentally ill in their family, who's aged, we probably all do, who benefits from some of these programs, who's an immigrant or has been an immigrant, or ask them to remember when they were, or their parents or grandparents were, how they struggled. So it's trying to appeal to that strategy. What could move them possibly? Are there people or organizations who could influence them? Did you know that President Biden's daughter was a social worker? I hope you did. And I'm going to go back in time a minute to President Kennedy. Way back in the 60s, do you know that he had a mentally retarded, that was the term then, a developmentally disabled sister who was in an institution? And he was persuaded to launch eventually and sign the Community Mental Health and Mental Retardation Act of 1963, 6 months before he was assassinated. As sad as that was, tragic even, it was very hopeful to know President Johnson followed all Kennedy's programs in the Great Society, as sure many of you have learned in your social policy classes, if not on the job. When you offer yourself as an expert, again, sometimes we're too humble. If you don't particularly know so much about aging or history of that, certainly the profession does. The NASW has policies called Social Work Speaks. They have 48 policies. You can get that book in your library. If you're a student, you can order it online. We're trying to make it, you can order it as a hard copy. We're trying to get NASW to put all those policies online now. But they do read their emails. They do read their letters, or one of their staff members, they do read their social media. I know, I've been on both sides. They do. And increase your influence by getting to know their staff. And by the way, making a visit to their office if it's possible. They have offices still, certainly before the pandemic, and now they're opening up, or certainly virtual offices. If you are serious about trying to influence that political leader about a particular issue or about several over time, then find out who they are and tell them who you are and who you represent. That's extremely important. Now I think we can go to slide 6, Ava. Plan in advance. What is the message? Who is the messenger? When do you give up and give in? When do you capitulate? We're going to play it out. If you find yourself at the table and you have your ear, you want to consider your group's message. What's the bottom line? What's the outcome of the political process? As I said, it's almost always some compromise. Be prepared to negotiate and compromise. But decide in your group, what can you give up? What are you willing to live with? What is something better than nothing? Again, that's not an automatic proverb, something is better than nothing. It is only something is better than nothing if you could revisit it, if you could go back in the future. We're not going to get it. But I want to talk about this continuum between doing nothing on one end and getting fired or having to resign at the other, right? That's a continuum. When do you capitulate? When do you acquiesce and say, we're not going to get it from this year, or we're not going to get Senator to change his mind? That's going to happen very often. But then when do you resist and reject that and bring in those principles of social action, assuming you have a group and a large constituency that agrees? We're going to go on to those. They'll see those social action tactics, demonstrations, sit-ins, things that you've seen, of course, on the media a lot. And we do, social workers use them in the appropriate times, in the appropriate readers, and when we can get the appropriate attention of social media and the press. But the phrase that does work, that phrase is, do not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Again, trying to get your foot in the door. What's obtainable now? And compromise is only possible if you realize that you're in it for the long haul. That senator or congressman or mayor may be voted out. And in 2 years, you'll have a chance to bring it up again. It doesn't help if you have an urgent matter that's an emergency, but it does help for a lot of legislation over time. So now I want to switch gears and I want to talk about, on slide 7, Ava, being on the outside at the door. What does being at the door mean, or being on the outside? Well, it means that nobody is legitimizing you. Nobody cares about your organization, and sometimes they just won't take a call. And that means you got to be at the door, literally at the door, like knocking, let me in, let me speak, come hear me out. But it's also figuratively being at the door, meaning, again, you're on the outside. How do you get their attention, or the attention of other political leaders who will make a difference when you're not recognized? And that does happen to social workers. As I said, it happened during the Reagan years. It happened during some of the Bush 43, and it happened certainly during Trump. But now, we're in, but if we may be out again. And maybe, by the way, in a local election, you are on the out. The person, the party that you reject has the majority. We still have to make our voices heard. We don't give up. And you're going to try that out by when you go to your state legislatures, if you join your NASW in doing those lead days or lobby days. I know California, where I am, is having one soon. You're going to go to Republicans who will not vote for your issue, but still say hello, leave the literature, make a friend there. Say, could I ever come back to Senator so-and-so? Does the mayor like to hear me, with city councilmen, with the town supervisor? You need to know the names of the people and get to know the staff people of the opposition, as well as the friendly administration. But we do go to social action techniques. We do use rallies. We do join coalitions that stand on the streets. We do street theater. We do shadowing. We do nonviolence resistance. I'll say a word about nonviolent resistance in a minute. But when you're considering rallies, demonstrations, creative art, if you're not going to have 1,000 people, then you can't go on a major park. But you could go to the office. You could go to a side street and have 50 people and make a difference. That happened to me many times in New York, making the demonstration at the congressman's office, or at a place where if you had 50 people, it would look like a lot. You have to be creative. And creative art makes a difference. These projects, some of you remember and still can see hung up if you look up quilts, the quilt project, and during the HIV/AIDS epidemic, thousands of people made these little sections of quilts and put them together in huge quilts that were placed all over the country. I think if you Google it, if you haven't heard of it, quilts and HIV, you'll see the gorgeous things they did, which got the attention of the media and the press and got the attention of political leaders. Now, you certainly remember, all of you, I'm sure, here on the what just happened in 2021, the rejection of the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade. Regardless of what you personally believe about abortion, NASW and our social work position is that women have a right to choose. That is unequivocal. So what happened after it? Well, you saw huge demonstrations of people coming out. Social workers were allies and joined many of those. And some participated in civil disobedience. And that means that they were willing to get arrested if needed. And they made that choice, though, knowingly, in advance, and in a discussion with the folks, their allies, the people there, that would happen. But what happened with the demonstrations around Roe v. Wade is people made it known at the ballot box. And voting is social work. That's my other hat. And there's a wonderful website, if you haven't seen it, that will continue into 2024, all the things you could do to help people register and vote, get their vote counted. And we've been doing that with great success, social workers. And thank all of you here on this in the room today who do vote, do register people to vote, make sure they get out, spend that day or that week in getting folks early voting, et cetera, if your state has it. So I want to say something about the opposition. There will be opposition to you. There are what we call, my dear colleague Lee Staples calls, the 7 Ds of defense. Means what the opposition will do to resist what you're trying. And some of these things are delaying, deceiving. You hear a lot about lying now. Deceiving, dividing and conquering, denying, discrediting. All those Ds are things that happen to anybody who's organized or participated in a big social change movement. There's always a backlash. We have to be prepared to anticipate the opposition. And what will the opposition do? Backlash happens everywhere, every time in this country. But only thing, what's the answer? We say be prepared. Don't be caught off guard. Know that after voting rights, there was some rescinding of it. No, after Roe v. Wade, they're going to, and all the people who are going to now vote pro-choice, they're going to try to do more things to discredit those folks. We just have to be prepared for it. Social workers are in it there for the long term. If anything, we're persistent, we persevere, we're vigilant, we look for the windows of opportunity. If you're in it for the long haul, you go back to the drawing board. Never give up. Critique yourself. Critique the organization. What did we do right? What did we do wrong? How can we get more allies on our side? Less opposition. There always will be opposition to anything that you're doing that matters. So here's an example of changing the message. A couple of more things to present before we can open it up for a discussion and any questions or comments. Here's one way of changing the message that I know you're probably familiar with. It was a game changer when the leaders of the LGBTQ plus movement changed the terminology 10 years ago from same-sex marriage, right? It was called same-sex marriage, right? That's what people wanted. Think what it meant when they changed the term. Many people started using marriage equality. The issue was marriage equality. Everybody should be equal. Do you see how many more people who, for religious or other reasons, are against LGBT marriages, same-sex marriages, but they are for equality? And therefore, it seems that many people think that after that term started to be used, it turned the tide for Supreme Court and state rulings that followed. I even heard Michael Moore, the filmmaker and critic, whom some of you may know, I've seen his work way back with the original Bowling for Columbine. We still need universal health care in this country, right? He said, and then he said, but Medicare for all was the slogan. But I don't know why. It's not working. We need another slogan to make sure that we get universal health care that's not tied just directly to employment. So here's another example of changing the messenger. There's a huge difference as to who asks. Huge difference for me and a 20-year-old student colleague of mine is a different race and a different gender who goes up and makes the ask. That's what you decide. Who's the best person to make the ask to that to the person in the field? We have to know we don't all have the same the same influence. So background, status, profession, celebrity. Some of you may recall Ryan White. Does that name sound familiar? For a lot of different reasons, it should. A young white boy who contracted AIDS from a blood transfusion he needed because he suffered from hemophilia. He needed a lot of blood and he got tainted blood with AIDS, with the AIDS virus. When he came before Congress, I remember it then. I think it was about 25 years ago. He was brought, no doubt, by organizers who are very strategic. And they asked for more funding for AIDS education, prevention, research. The Congress people who were outliers and against AIDS legislation came around, all because of Ryan White. Is that fair that it had to be a young, white, innocent boy who contracted it? No, it's not fair. But we're playing in an arena that's not fair, and you use what you can. The celebrity who will work, the businessman who makes a difference. You don't have to agree with him, but if that businessman is on the side for that piece of legislation, go ahead. Do you know that the Ryan White HIV/AIDS Prevention and Treatment Act in 1990 was passed under Bush 41, reauthorized ever since? Billions of dollars have gone because of that one organizing incident, getting Ryan White to the table. So we do escalate and we do up the ante as we need to. And I want to say one last thing, a final word about considering when you're on the outside. It does mean exercising your freedom of speech, your freedom of assembly, know when, where, and when you could demonstrate. Jamming phone lines by making millions of calls is perfectly fine. It's annoying, but it's perfectly fine. Use social media. Now, civil disobedience that could end in arrest, again, is the choice. It shouldn't happen off guard. The group that's organizing that demonstration or that rally or that protest should know that that could happen, whether it's right or wrong, that the police could come down. So slide 8, the ethical considerations about knocking and making noise versus breaking and entering. There are ethical considerations as a profession we pay very strict attention to, but it doesn't mean that you can't be loud, you can't be vociferous, and you can get arrested if that's what you want to, can do, and your group agrees to. But here's the principle: no surprises. You have to weigh the risks, be informed, recognize that some people are more vulnerable and hesitant. A family member can't get arrested. Please don't put them in harm's way. I've seen too many organizers, hopefully they weren't social workers, who didn't pay any attention to that. People got arrested or beat up or jarred around or lost their licenses because they were taken off guard. So if you want to peacefully protest, and some people want to do civil disobedience, which happens a lot, do it. but the people who don't want to get arrested should leave. It should be planned to the extent that you can control the context. Sometimes, of course, you can't, and things do get out of control. But who can take the risk? Who's willing to be up there? With the South African apartheid movement years ago, every week people went to demonstrate in front of the South African embassy. And then at some point at 5 o'clock, people who went home, and the rest of the people stayed knowing they'd be arrested. That took place for a year, and it was very, very effective. And so that principle of informed choice is important. Calculate the risks of whatever you're doing, anticipate that backlash, be ready for it, and that's how you could do it. So slide 9 is recognizing that others in your coalition. So what happens if some people want to go inside and talk to the legislature and other people say they don't? Well, I think the two groups should be able to provide inside and outside at the same time. Please show respect for the other side. They're not sellouts. If just because they go inside, they're not necessarily being co-opted. Just like the people who don't want to go in and are making noise and are disruptive, are not just rebel rousers. We have to show respect for these different strategies because it's all about the end, the eye on the prize, getting whatever piece of legislation or policy change in your organization, in your community, at the state house, in Congress nationally. When Representative Senator Warnock was elected to Georgia, some of you remember, of course, his first term, he talked about how it was to move from the outside, as he was a preacher who always demonstrated, to move on the inside. He said when he was at the Capitol before running for office, he got arrested for not leaving, for protesting over a budget issue. He made the choice. He weighed the risks and benefits. Now he's on the inside. Guess what? He still preaches for people on the outside to come and make him accountable, to hold him accountable, to say he's not doing enough. He understands that people on the inside have to be pushed to reasonable limits, as long as it is reasonable and an understanding of what the limits of being on the inside do. So the best is to have a unified or coordinated strategy. It's a chess game. Are we willing to take the risk of the misportrayals, what we're doing, what we're saying, to be in that arena? I think if you think the issue is worth it, by all means, put your foot in there. So the last slide, Ava, is reminding all of you or introducing some of you to the Code of Ethics, the NASW, Section 6. Remember, the code is a living, breathing document, and it may be changing. There's some chance to change the code this year. It's changed. It can be changed by the delegates who get elected by NASW members to go to the delegate assembly. And it's Section 6 says social workers' ethical responsibilities to the broader society. And there's a whole section about what our obligations are inside the workplace and outside, including commentary on public participation, social and political action. And it says social workers, and I'll end with this. Social workers should engage in social and political action that seeks to ensure that all people have equal access to resources, employment, services, and opportunities they require to meet their basic human needs and to develop fully. And it goes on from there. And on that note, I will stop. Hope this was helpful to you. Hope you got a lot of principles. My slideshow can be available. This will be recorded if you want other people to hear about it, to hear my lecture in the future. And I am available to anybody at T. Mizrahi. My email address will be there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mizrahi. That was a really great presentation, and I'm was really drawn to the idea of giving people the benefit of the doubt and approaching everyone as if, they have the best interest in mind or are just not knowledgeable on a situation, even if you know going in that they oppose what you're fighting for. I think that's a really strength-based and affirming way of
Yes.
approaching policy work. And again, the toolkit that you gave us for interacting when we are in those spaces, and even when we're not able to get in those spaces, ways that we can break those barriers down for us and make access to the political workers more accessible. So I thank you so much
You're
for
very
joining
welcome. And thank you, everybody, for being here.
us.
And I look forward to further encounters.
Yes, thank you so much and have a good day.
You too. Bye.